Welcome to Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes. We're back with a talk video. Merrin's kit has been released. We're going to go through the kit review, do our breakdown and analysis, take a look at the developer insights for what CG is highlighting. We'll look back at the Asajj Ventress Omicron and see what I think it means for Merrin, if anything, and then wrap up as we do in these videos with the free-to-play gearing of my roster. With Merrin, we have a dark side support Nightsister, and the big question I had after she was announced was if this was going to mean the end of low-geared Nightsisters, which if you watch this channel regularly, you know I employ often. I was wondering if there was going to be aspects within her kit that were going to necessitate relics, or just make those low-gear Nightsisters even better. And from how I'm reading this, I am pretty happy about what I'm seeing here. Before we break down the kit, we'd like to do a cursory look at these developer notes. Usually there's something worth taking out of here. This time there's a lot of information worth highlighting. The key attributes portion, Merrin will amplify plague and revives, add protection recovery, fight a reactive cleanse, but the conditions are such where I think that is almost negligible, and she's going to help Nightsisters up against current counters. Now in the strategy tips portion, there's a few more pieces of information here that I think are worth paying attention to. Merrin will have 0 speed and only gains turn meter under certain circumstances. We'll look at that more in the kit breakdown, but she is going to become the 3rd Fallen Order character who is going to be benefiting from either no speed or low speed. In the final bullet here in the strategy tips, they mention how plague distribution from unique 2 is dependent on the potency of the revived character. So maybe we don't do a complete overhaul on the mods, but maybe we make sure that there are potency secondaries on the sets that we place on Nightsister characters. So they state here their reasoning for why the first special Shadow Stride is going to unlock at gear 12, and they cite the precedent for Paper Zombie. I understand why a lot of the player base is upset about this, because it necessitates that you must have a 7-star character in order to have full utility of this character. This ability though, and we'll get to it more in detail as we get to it later, it is going to make the squad better, but I still think the squad is going to be plenty good with Merrin. What I do think it's going to do is shift how we play offensively or defensively and where the ceilings are, but this to me is not a big deal. I'm going to be plenty happy with Merrin at any level, and what I think it ultimately is going to do is maybe it changes how we farm these characters. Just make sure you prioritize Merrin, and we need her at gear 12 anyway for Cal Kestis, so most of us are going to be going after her pretty quickly. This is going to be, for a player like me, a month and a half at most of being a nuisance. And based on how I'm reading the kit, maybe I just leave her at gear 12 unless CG gives me a really good reason to take her up to relics. Now the next portion here, they do emphasize that she is going to allow us to beat the Secrets and Shadows assault battle. That's pretty huge because that thing's a major pain and most of us have just accepted the L on it. Now for our streamlined breakdown of this kit, where we just pull out some of the extraneous information to simplify our analysis of what's going on here. The basic ability, I-Core Bolt, special damage to the target, inflict plague, 2 stacks. We're going to be using this ability a lot. And I think one thing that is happening with this kit is the plague mechanic within Nightsisters is going to achieve, or could potentially achieve, a renewed focus, because the way that I play them right now, all I'm trying to do is utilize the sacrifice from Telzin's lead to drive up the damage on Asajj, and Asajj becomes the damage dealer. Plague kind of becomes irrelevant within that. Now, the way Merrin is working, Plague may become much more important, and we'll talk more about that in the Synergies portion. Now here's the first special Shadow Stride, and again, this is the one that unlocks at gear 12 and has a Zeta with a cooldown of 3. Now this ability here, AoE inflict 2 stacks of plague, all Nightsister allies recover health and protection, then Merrin cleanses all buffs and debuffs from herself and gains magic stealth. She'll cleanse all allies and revives a random Nightsister ally with 50% health. Magic Stealth, that causes Merrin to not be targeted, take damage, or gain turn meter. She'll be immune to buffs, debuffs, and taunt effects, and if there are no allies, then she will lose that ability. Now, obviously, you're going to want this ability. There's a reason this unlocks at Gear 12. It's going to fundamentally change how we play the Nightsisters. It works on several different levels to make the Nightsisters a major pain. It eliminates their weaknesses and elevates them to the current game. More plague for Talzin synergy, additional healing to support Daka, and additional revive to save the match if you happen to lose Daka. But the Nightsisters are already solid without this ability on offense, and all of the uniques on Merrin's kit will function, so the Nightsisters are about to get much better on offense without all of this. However, what I think this ability does is make them defensively viable. But you don't want a low star character on defense anyway, so I'm not having a major problem here. They will have some problems on offense, but by the time you farm them, then they're going to just get a major boost with this ability. Now, in terms of the ability in particular, and less about the gearing threshold, what is important here is not the plague mechanics, the healing, or even the revive. What matters here is magic stealth. That is what this ability is all about. That's what makes it from good to great. It's why they're putting that Gear 12 threshold on, because what we have here is it prevents Merrin from being able to be targeted, defeated, or damaged. That means there is a character on the field that we have to account for in our play and we have to strategize around. On top of Daka constantly stacking her health and survivability, who is reviving everyone else, while Asajj gets potentially more and more dangerous on the side. So what that really does, it has now shrunk the amount of counters, and that's what is going to elevate this team to defensive viability. Whereas on offense, unless the AI suddenly gets really smart, the AI is probably going to mess it up, so it's going to be fine on offense without this thing. But on defense, possibly watch out. Now, the second special here, we can get through a little faster. Dathomir will be your grave. This is a cooldown of 3. This is a little bit more straightforward. Special damage to the target and stun. If this defeats a target, AoE inflict plague 4 stacks. If the enemy has 2+ stacks of plague, those enemies will dispel buffs on them. This one is less important. I'd only opt to use it under the condition that it does defeat an enemy or that it is a character that must be stunned. The larger cooldown means you won't use it as often, and I'd rather shoot for the plague effects by timing it appropriately than just getting a stun on a character that I don't care as much if they are stunned or not. In general, the Nightsisters have plenty of stuns anyway, so under most conditions, I expect to use the basic over this because that's getting the plague out on the field regardless, whereas this has a conditional plague mechanic. Now for the uniques. First up is Last of the Nightsisters. This is an Omicron ability, and we might spend a little bit of time here. So the first time a Nightsister ally is defeated each encounter, Merrin gains 100% turn meter. Whenever a Nightsister ally is defeated or revived, Merrin gains 15% turn meter, plus 2% per relic level of the defeated or revived character. And remember, that's basically just saying Talzin lead. Whenever a character is brought back and goes away from Talzin lead, you're going to be getting that turn meter. Now, I was wondering if we'd see more specifications like this in her kit, mechanics that would require or encourage relics, and this to me, it's not surprising, and I'm fine with it. And I'm fine with it because it's less than an incentive than I was fearful of. Players who have them at relics, they're going to get a nice little boost, but it's a small boost, and it's one that I feel like I can live without. And what we see here, I think, is another ability that is going to help make this squad a nice defensive option for players who have already invested the relics on them, because that additional turn meter is going to make them more of a threat on defense. On offense, though, I think it's perfectly safe to leave the relics off, or to at least delay them until CG has given us an adequate incentive to put the relics on. Because if you think of a Relic 5 character, that means you're going to get plus 10% turn meter for the extra relic levels. So you're going from plus 15% for a non-relic to plus 25% turn meter for a Relic 5 character. Or thinking of that in terms of defeats and revives, going from 7 to 4. Which is not really a big deal to me. Or if you just think about it in terms of each character that is being defeated and revived, going from 2 to 3. It's kind of small. That is livable without, especially because if you allow multiple Nightsisters to die off, which is much easier when the characters are not at relics. So the players who don't have relics on their Nightsisters are going to be able to take advantage of that defeat and revive mechanic faster and more often. So I think it's all going to average out to the point where I'm less concerned about it. Now the next portion is while Merrin has allies, her speed is set to 0 and she is immune to turn meter gain and removal. This is going to help her against counters like troopers where Moff Gideon could strip the turn meter. Instead, she has the potential to interrupt the turn meter train, which is going to help out a lot there because troopers have always traditionally been one of the strongest counters against the squad. Now we have to look at other options. With the Omicron, it is Grand Arena. Whenever an ally is defeated or revived, Merrin gains 100% turn meter. At the start of Merrin's turn, AoE inflict enemies with 1 stack of plague. Now, I'm of two minds on this. If you don't have full relics, I think this could be amazing. If you do have relics on all the Nightsisters, then the extra turn meter might be close enough to negligible. So I'm going to wait and see on this. I'll determine if Merrin changes the ceiling on this faction or not. Right now, I'm expecting her to eliminate risk in RNG against a lot of the existing counters. Take a CLS counter. That has always been a risky one. It's been possible, but it's not reliable. I think Merrin might elevate it to a reliable counter. And it's going to add in some viability against lower level counters. So there's also teams that I use the Nightsisters up against, like Grievous squads or Qui-Gon Jinn squads. There's always been a small amount of risk where it's not 100% win rate, but it's probably 85 to 90% win rate, which I've been happy with. But I think Merrin might elevate it now to 100% win rate. But if it doesn't fundamentally change what Nightsisters can do, it just makes them better at what they already do, then is it really an Omicron worth putting on? On the other hand, if it does fundamentally change what they can beat, then I'm going to consider it. Then it will become an important option to me. What the Ami does mean is Merrin might start taking turns almost constantly, which means cycling through her cooldowns very quickly, and it means what I was pointing out about her basic ability at the top of this. This is why and how she could be taking those turns so quickly, using that basic constantly and really driving plague up around the field. There's a lot of plague mechanics going on with this kit. The second unique ability, Vengeful Bond, this is a Zeta ability, and bear with me here, I got a lot to say about this one. Whenever an ally is inflicted with a debuff, if Merrin has 0% turn meter, cleanse all debuffs from that ally and Merrin gains 25% turn meter. That's that reactive cleanse that CG alluded to in the notes. If Merrin has more than 0% turn meter, she will gain 10% turn meter instead. Whenever an enemy is damaged, all Nightsister allies will recover 5% protection. But here's what I like and don't like here from the way that I play the Nightsisters. It means only in the early battle do I think the debuffs won't stick and Merrin will have 0% turn meter. That's why I said that's a little overstated. I don't actually think it's going to trigger all that often because of between this unique and the first unique ability, she's going to have a lot of turn meter in a lot of circumstances. I only think in the initial opening of the game are there going to be circumstances where she is at 0% turn meter, and in those situations I don't really care that she or any other Nightsister has a debuff, because the only time that I care when debuffs are on Nightsisters is when Daka is by herself and healing immunity lands on her, or a stun occurs which prevents her from reviving the field. So this one, it's whatever. That's not the portion here that I care about or don't care about. And so that 25% turn meter gain is not really going to be happening. So really how this is going to work in practice is she's only going to be getting that 10% turn meter gain in the majority of circumstances from that Talzine lead, on top of all that turn meter you are getting from the first unique. So she's going to be taking some turns pretty quickly. Now, the last portion here is whenever a Nightsister ally is revived, grant all allies instant defeat immunity for 2 turns, and there is a 20% chance to AoE inflict 1 stack plague. Now, the instant defeat immunity here, it's probably the Zeta portion, and on the first read through, I was a little concerned that it may impede Daka's Zeta mechanics. What I think it means is that we just need to adjust how we play Daka, where we're not going to use the revive mechanic as often, because what the damage immunity is going to do is allow us to use the basics more often, because Daka won't need to be reviving, because she won't be under as threat as often. And when she is under threat, she's going to be protected a little bit more. So she can do the revive in situations where things are dire, there will be damage immunity up, and at that point, you'll have some time bought in which to heal her up, and then you can get back onto the attacking, reviving, dying train to make everyone more of a threat. Now, while all this sounds good, I don't think it's mandatory, because she's already survivable and good. With how many turns Merrin is going to be taking, I don't think Daka's going to actually be under threat all that often, at least while you're using her on offense. So this might be important on defense. I think from everything that's going on here, Nightsisters may become a very important defensive team, but I think there's just certain adjustments with how we play. It might mean Gas becomes an important counter, or Treya becomes an important counter, or Django and Bounty Hunters become an important counter. Just anything that prevents those revive mechanics might now be necessitated based on what we are seeing here. So I think I'm going to wait to put this one on. I'm going to see how she looks in the field before I make an ultimate decision on the Zeta. Because what I'm thinking here is on offense, they're going to be plenty good without it. It's not going to be necessary. I don't think the AI is going to play the team correctly. On defense, probably put this one on, because what this is going to do is help shrink all those counters. It's going to make this team enough of a pain where those counters that I mentioned a moment ago are going to become somewhat necessitated just to avoid the annoyance of dealing with this squad on defense. And with the addition of Merrin and her Grand Arena Omicron, we need to reevaluate the Asajj Omicron and consider, is this going to become a 2 Ami squad, or how do we want to utilize this? And surprisingly, when I looked at this, a lot of players have put the Asajj Ami on. This one I have left off. There are more players with the Asajj Ami than the Zam Omicron, which is another popular one. There are more players with the Asajj Omicron than the Iden Omicron, which is one of those near mandatory Omicrons. I'm kind of surprised how low that is. Now, that's probably because there's a lot of players with younger accounts where Asajj is just an easily farmed character, but that's a bit of a surprise to me. I had no idea so many players had already applied the Asajj one, because no one really talks about it. It's not that critical, which is why I wanted to revisit it on the eve of Merrin being added to the game. And with the Asajj Ami, as a reminder, it's going to give additional health, potency, and tenacity to the Nightsisters. Whenever an ally or enemy is defeated, all Nightsister allies will gain 10% turn meter, recover protection, and the cooldown of the AoE special Endless Wraith will be reset. When Asajj uses Endless Wraith, she will also inflict healing immunity on everyone and reduce their defense and max health for the rest of the counter, and Asajj has plus 10% crit damage for each enemy with debuffs. Now there is potentially a lot of debuffs on the field that could be very good, but what I think is really valuable or potentially valuable from this turn meter is going to be that defense and max health reduction. That can be extremely powerful, and that AoE healing immunity is going to be pretty disruptive. But nothing here is mandatory for me. The additional stats I'm actually somewhat less interested in on a Nightsister squad, because I like it when my Nightsisters die off easily. It'll help Daka, and if you have a lot of gear 11 or lower characters on a Nightsister squad, it's going to be a negligible benefit anyway than if you have relics on them. So it's something that is not a major concern. But what I do think this Omicron makes me consider is maybe that we're thinking about this squad a little bit wrong, and maybe there's another place that we can think about it. So here at the top, think of Nightsister Initiate just as a Merrin stand-in for now. We have the standard Nightsister squad where Merrin can be considered as the replacement for that 5th slot that could rotate easily between Acolyte, Spirit, or Talia, depending on gear level or conditions. This was how I think a lot of players' initial reaction was of how to think about it. But now that I've thought about it a little bit more, I wonder if there's some alternate teams that we can create. There's a possibility here that Asajj with that Omicron could move over to Trench, because Trench is going to have a lot of debuffs which are going to have effects with that Omicron that Django is going to put down, because added debuffs means more crit damage for Asajj from that Ami. And also, if you have Dooku in the Asajj slot, what you have are minimal AoEs. You just have Django, and what Asajj does instead is give the squad some AoE damage that could be very beneficial to it, and combine that with that max health damage, or rather that max defense and health reduction. And the other implication here is that the Nightsister squad then would have Telzine, probably Spirit, Daka, Zombie, and Merrin in the Initiate slot. And that's because here, what I am thinking from reading this kit, and what I was alluding to when I kept emphasizing the renewed import of Plague, I think that the damage from Ventress is going to be less important because the Plague is going to be so out of control with this squad that it may not be necessary to have Ventress, because the Plague is going to be taking characters out faster than Ventress's damage is going to be increasing, which means that the stun from Spirit or the one-shot hit ability of Spirit may be more of an interest on this squad, and Ventress may be more viable along with Trench. And this, I think, is another scenario that we have to consider. And once we get that testing with Merrin out there, I think we need to pay a lot of attention to how quickly and how damaging that Plague mechanic will be. Because what the addition of Merrin may mean is that instead of driving up damage as being the big mechanic for the Nightsisters, we instead see Plague become the critical mechanic of the Nightsister faction. And now for our wrap up, this is all of the gearing from February 6th. So nearly all, if not all, of this gearing is all going to be related to Dr. Aphra. This is when the farms were completed, and this is when I did the Dr. Aphra unlock. 000 and BT1 here, just taking them up to their stars. Sana. Sana was a character who, until Relics, was not great. I was not able to find any low gear utility for her. She just died way too easily. So that squad was never able to really function, and even now I'm pretty ambivalent on it. I think a Relic on Han is pretty important. Of the Aphra requirements, really only Hondo was the one that I thought had some usage pre-Relics. BT1 and 000 even at Relics, we're not great without Dr. Aphra. They kind of need Dr. Aphra to become the threat that they need to be. I tried Swordy and everything, and just that was not working for me. I think we might just skip ahead here, because this is all just me adding relic levels. And we keep going. There's a few more parts here, so just wanted to show this section here, because this is when we get a little quest completion, and that's fun to look at. Making that little bit of progress. Yeah, and that gets us ready for Aphra. And then at some point I realized that I had forgotten to put the Chrysanthemum Omicron on, and I'd been playing my Java squad without the Chrysanthemum. So I put that on. And this last portion here is for Dr. Aphra herself. Just a couple hours later, unlocking her and adding what she brings to my roster. Very happy with her, but I had also invested in her Datacron in advance, knowing that I would get her, so I was ready to go to put that Datacron on. And also, she's a single Ami character for me right now. She's got that leadership Ami. I don't remember if I put it on right away or not. I may have wanted to give it a week to see how I thought she functioned without it. I think I did wait a week, and she was definitely not very good without it. Sometimes I just like to look, just so I can have an informed take, especially on these characters where we don't have a window to test them out in advance with it or without. But I mean, I can use her in Squad Arena a little bit to see what she's like without her, Conquest without. And she's fine. But just some of the other things don't work as well. And we'll wrap it up there. I'm glad we didn't have to wait too long for Merrin. Really excited for what she's going to be bringing to the Nightsister squad. I think she's going to be an excellent character. And don't listen to the crowd about the Gear 12 issues. I think it's negligible in the short term where you're not going to average 7 stars. And if you are a player who farms some of this stuff at a little bit of slower rate, you'll have to deal with it a little longer, but it might also be a good incentive to prioritize the farm on her. She's a character who I think is worth it. But thank you for watching. Be safe out there, everyone. Be excellent to each other. This is Still Plays Galaxy of Heroes.